Welcome back to another episode of MProper Musings, where we get to discuss topics and ideas that have been running through our heads all week. This episode is not specifically about empowering women at home, work, or play, but it is what happens behind the scenes when the host of MProper Mimi, Miss Mimi Jax, gets together with co-producer Cyren Young, and we chat about recent events. If you have any topics that you want us to discuss or guests that you want us to bring to the MProper Mimi podcast, drop me a line at mpropermimi.com or send me a message on social media at MProperMimi, and we will try to cover your musings as well. Welcome to MProper Mimi and Cy. We're here having some MProper Musings, having a little chit chat, catching up on the week and the week prior, on just conversations, just thoughts that we're having, and yeah, all that good stuff.
Indeed,
How you
indeed.
doing, Cy?
Hanging in there, trying to make it do what it
Uh-huh.
do, finding and maintaining the balance. That's the key. That's how I'm closing out the year. I don't know about everybody else, but yes, maintaining the
Mm-hmm.
balance, trying not to go stir crazy, continue and remain working. Hopefully, the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
world cooperates. Um, Other than that,
Yes.
keeping my head low and trying to rebound, I guess, after all the things we've all been
Yeah.
through over the last year. So, yeah.
It's a lot to process, just even the whole year. I personally love this time of year, because my birthday's coming up. So November is a great reflection, time to like look back at the whole year. Um, but yeah, a lot has happened, a lot has happened.
Indeed.
Um, yeah,
There's a
one
lot
thing I
going on.
know. Definitely. Yeah. And one thing that keeps going on that seems like it's continuously going on is I know that you've probably seen Dave Chappelle's latest special on Netflix, Closer.
Hmm.
So I want to know kind of, what did you think about that?
Honestly, I watched The Closer, as I'm sure most people have by now. Um,
Mm,
if I'm real, I'm a Chappelle fan, but I'm not an apologist for anyone. And my
mhm,
first reaction was, okay, I get it. This is a different type of humor. This commentary that's being brought to us is not about laughter. This is about irony. Um, and
and his platform.
the ability to
Hmm.
find the laughter in that. And I'm not quite sure most people got that. But the seriousness I certainly got, and I was kind of surprised. I didn't find myself, like most people, I think, had this series, had that particular special been a bit more light, should I say, a bit lighter in the realm of comedy, where for every tough or difficult conversation that was brought up, there was still something in that balance of laughter and enjoyment. I'm pretty sure most people wouldn't have had as much of an issue with it. But because he was so straightforward and direct, and
Mm,
I guess you take
right.
dog it in a way about hitting home and driving home his position and his point, um, I felt like
And
most people,
unapologetic.
yeah, it's unapologetic. He wasn't on the defensive at all. And I think most people probably look at it like, why are we still talking about this? And I was like, well, the conversation never stopped. And people really have been going hard in any direction regarding the subject matter. Um,
Hmm.
I never weighed in on my thoughts and opinions regarding what he said, but I was surprised at some of the things that people took issue with.
The
Um,
responses that they had.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Yeah.
was
Hmm.
number one, he made several jokes that people could call questionable or maybe in poor taste or, what, just insensitive, I guess.
Hmm.
I didn't necessarily feel that way, but I can understand how somebody might. Number one, I wasn't the target of anything regarding there. I was part of the conversation because I'm a black man in America. But I do understand that it
Hmm.
wasn't specific about black and a man in America. It was about the politics of society and how we currently exist, and that certain
Hmm.
people are being slighted in a way that others aren't. Certain people have to push and fight for certain things that maybe others don't. and we all know what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to allude to much, but
Mhm.
I think it's very interesting. I'll give you a perfect example. While everyone's clearly talking about the firestorm set ablaze with the LGBTQ plus community, um, I found it interesting, right? Not, I haven't heard a single person complain about the jokes he made about the attacks on Asians, about COVID, about space juice. I was like, wait a minute,
Of
these
course
were
not.
these were comments that easily someone could have been like, whoa, did you really just say that? And I remember to myself thinking like, oh, okay, Dave.
Hmm.
However, I didn't think, I guess I should say that I should have recognized that, I mean, if there's already an argument or something to contend with, it's going to
Is
continue.
that history? Yeah. And I think that's what people picked up on, and that's what they're harping on, that this, it was a continuation. It almost was like he's coming back to readdress previous things and justify himself. Um, and even those groups that you mentioned that are being slighted, he's not in either one of those groups.
He's not. I
He,
think, I wonder if, so I'm going to ask you,
mhm.
did you find anything he said to be offensive?
um, Not so offensive that it's coming to my memory right now. I'm not, you know, there's nothing that I retain that I was like, ah, nah, I can't mess with him no more because of this, and that.
Okay.
Um,
And that's not to say
uh,
that he didn't say some sensitive things or things that could be construed as
yeah,
insensitive
because
towards.
I'm quite sure he said something about women that I didn't like, but but I take it in stride that he's a comedian, he's using his platform. We are up here watching him being entertained on his platform. So, yeah, if you don't like it, we could shut it off. We could not watch him.
But we also know
Um,
that millions of people around the world are watching the same thing, so we might shut it out, but it's still there.
yeah,
And it
yeah.
became the fodder for every, well, we don't have water cooler moments anymore in the pandemic, but you know what I mean. I don't know a single person that wasn't talking about it immediately thereafter, myself included,
Mhm.
except
Mhm.
I think I might have been not dismissive, but I took I took it with a grain of salt. But I recognized
Yeah.
where he was coming from, and I think maybe myself being a black man who can empathize and understand
Mm.
where he was coming from, maybe that's my privilege. And I'm only saying
Mm.
maybe that is my privilege. However, I
Yeah.
find myself trying to put myself in the shoes or the possible perspective of anyone else that might have felt slighted, or this is insensitive, this is unnecessary, this has now become redundant. I heard all those things,
Mm.
and I'm not quite sure if you can consider something redundant when there's nothing done about it.
Right.
And the conversation is there. I don't think everyone wants to talk about it, and I think that is the real issue. I think Dave is not poking a bear. He's saying this isn't going away. This isn't
Mm.
going away, and you're not going to stop me from talking about something that's so obvious. To my understanding, his point
Mhm.
was to make example that a certain community has a certain amount of leverage that isn't afforded to everyone else. And I'm not saying that I don't believe he was charging them with a crime or responsibility. It's just to recognize, hey, you know that. And I don't think that, I know that some people would sound crazy, they'll tell you're crazy if you think that community has a certain amount of privilege, and I'd say you're wrong. Every community has a privilege in some way. The question is,
I know.
what does that
I
privilege afford them?
well,
Right now,
because
we're not
yeah.
allowed to speak about certain things or certain communities because we're told that we're not of those things. But that doesn't stop anyone of those communities from talking about ours. It doesn't stop them from
Well, yeah.
addressing ours
So
or redressing ours, which is why I understood where he was coming from. But
yeah, and so that's part of the problem. So like by him bringing it up, though, he may not be directly giving them a charge or directive, but by shining the light on it, aren't you pretty much saying that it needs to be addressed? Or you
I
think he's
agree
just
with you.
shining the light on it and it's just a light shine and keep walking? But
I think that might be the part that was lost in translation. I think that,
Mm,
and I could be wrong. I'm not speaking for Chappelle. I'm just saying what I got from it. And my take from that
yeah.
was here is a person who is simply saying, hey guys, they use the same tactics before to divide us. We might be in two different communities. We might be,
Mm,
who knows, interwoven. It might be overlapping. But the point
mm-hmm.
is, my problem is not with you. My problem is the unfair treatment you receive in lieu of what I'm not getting. We're fighting for the same equity and equality, but
Mm-hmm.
one group is getting it. We were all in that same fight. One group is getting it and the other's not. And if that group isn't going to acknowledge it as such, then you're going to be a part of that conversation as well. And I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. Someone else,
Yeah.
smarter person could tell me, hey, you missed this part though. And that's true.
Yeah.
It's possibility. I just know
Yeah. It's
there's a,
kind of lost in translation though, because he's not, um, by not giving them a direct charge or, statement of responsibility, he's basically just saying, y'all mad at me, but look, y'all ain't doing this,
and I think
you
that
know?
part isn't exactly fair either. Like, look, if we're going to be real, Dave, you had a conversation by yourself on stage. That was no one else gets to talk to you during that point. This is not the old school
Mm-hmm.
days where the hecklers can challenge you and change up your whole routine. This is Dave Chappelle, like you
Right?
said, on his
Mm-hmm.
platform, using his voice, which is his right and his privilege.
Yeah.
But if we're going to talk about responsibility, I can't tell him, well, Dave, you should do this with it. All I can say is this is what he chose to do. How do I respond to it? Could have been done in a
Yeah.
different fashion, possibly, but I think he did it on purpose to make sure you talked about it. I mean, that's entertainment, right? And
It
if you want to
sure
make
did get people
sure,
talking.
I've
My
listened
mama
to
and my
friends,
daughter.
right? And that's the thing I'm talking about. Now, I haven't had a
Yeah.
conversation with my mom about this, but across generation, I've definitely seen that. And I'm surprised, even at work, I'm like, wow, everybody wanted to
Yeah.
talk about this. And most people are lost. Like, what are we supposed to do with this? What did he really mean by this? But I don't think people are really listening to Dave. And then he sat down and gave a response to the challenge
Yes.
of him being shut down, canceled. We saw his response where he says, hey, the festivals that invited me have now disinvited me. But Netflix is still there. Now we knew that was going to happen because I mean they have some money to
Money.
make back. They paid him already, so we understood
Mm-hmm.
that. But
Yeah.
I do recognize that even in that
Mm.
response, as he said, you're not going to summon me as if I did something wrong. If we want to have a conversation, we can do that openly. I
On
would,
my grounds,
I
when
would,
I want to, where I want to. Like it's
I,
an old Western.
I don't think it should necessarily be that way, but I understand the point of his position because he understands that he's
Yeah.
already under the gun. He put himself in that,
Mm-hmm.
which I give him full credit and responsibility of. But
Yeah.
I think if I'm
Mm.
being honest, the only way he can really have a fair conversation is if it's not on your platform or theirs, take it somewhere neutral. But does that
Mm-hmm.
exist? Does it exist right now?
Maybe in the Black
See,
community.
now you're getting to where I'm going. See,
Yes.
because the
Yes.
greater conversation that we need to have isn't in the echo chamber. It's the
Mm-mm.
rest of the
Mm-hmm.
world,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That both communities or and I hate saying, first of all, can I just say this? Not as a qualifier, I don't feel like the communities are so separate, even though I'm not of the LGBT community. Um, Q plus, I'm not leaving anything out.
Yeah.
Um, I feel as though it's impossible to separate because so many people in our culture and community are of that community. So if I say, well, we're two different communities, that's not exactly true, right? And we're
Mm.
also being impacted in similar ways and not so similar ways. So I don't really know. I'm not going to take it so far as to say, well, my point of understanding, like,
Hmm.
hey, where's the neutral ground? The neutral ground should be wherever we decide to be, but it's not. Wherever we decide to have that conversation, I think you're right. It might have been better to have that conversation behind closed doors, not in public with the rest of the world, but then it would look like you're not doing something for transparency, like
Yeah.
you're up to something.
And if the point of this is to be transparent and to bring it to the table and shine that light on the issues of who's, have certain privileges and whatnot, then it needs to be out in the open conversation,
Indeed.
you know, and it's not like everybody has a representation, like who is our Martin Luther King, you know,
Yeah.
you know, like for this conversation, you know, like I don't know that there is one on either side. Like Dave is not the spokesman for, you know, the whole black community, the whole straight or cis black community, you know, because he still certainly has his own, um, you know, religion, belief,
Hmm.
history, you know, that he's bringing to the table. Um, so I don't know if it's just a peace talk, you know, um, warriors, you know, come out to play.
Something tells me that if we're real honest in that conversation, that's not necessary. Because within five
Mhm.
to 10 minutes, you get past the what was egregious, what should have, shouldn't been said. Okay, let's get
Mm.
beyond the pleasantries and just say this. I believe him when he says that he has no gripe and no smoke with that community. His stance has always been the same. He has a problem with white people and the way they do things in this world concerning everyone
Yeah,
else. I don't think that's a secret. That's not a hidden fact or figure. We all know it. We understand
yeah,
why. I think, unfortunately, the conversation it's being diverted. There's a detour that always happens because no one wants to talk about the ugliness that exists and how it exists for certain people a
mm,
certain way and others a different way. And my personal perspective doesn't lessen yours. It doesn't mean that
right.
what you experienced isn't true. Simply just saying, hey, that might be your experience, but that's not how we experience it. That's not what I went through. And I wish all
Hmm.
parties could see that. Like, hey, y'all kind of saying the same thing. Y'all just don't believe that you're listening to one another. If we could stop
Yeah.
the bickering long enough to recognize he's not targeting you, he used it as an example. He's
Hmm.
showing the rest of the world because no one believes. Look, when a black man has a complaint about what's going on, it's either considered, well, they're always complaining. Angry black man.
What? I ain't never heard that before. You mean angry black woman?
Hey, that too.
And he's prepared to die on that hill.
I mean,
It,
he
it
made a
seems
career
like
out of it.
because it keeps coming up.
He made a
Yeah,
career out of it.
absolutely.
It might not have been
Series, you know,
specifically
yeah.
the LGBTQ plus community. It could be anything from, look, Dave Chappelle as a comedian has taken on the true tradition of that, right? So if we're
Hmm.
looking at his heroes, the Dick Gregory's,
Hmm.
the Carlins, the Pryors, right?
Hmm.
Um, if we're truly looking at that, then those people certainly spoke to everything that happened during their tenure, their time. So if
Yeah,
he's poking, we've seen Dave. He has all the examples in the world. His series, Chappelle Show, went at everybody,
right.
from Michael Jackson to Prince to Stevie to clearly the man I'm not mentioning because we all know why. Um,
uh,
the point is, if we look at his track record, and we're supposed to do that, right? I don't know Dave
mm-hmm.
Chappelle personally. I don't know the community personally. I don't know every person that's going after him for his current rhetoric. What I do know is that when I look back on his history, he has a history of balance. Anyone can get it. He's a comedian. And if
Mm.
you say
Yeah,
something or do something that calls attention to something that he finds ironic or funny, he's got to call it out. That's
100%.
that's it. So now
Hmm.
I have to transition this, right?
Yeah.
I'm a huge sports fan, and the world
Hmm.
knows what's going on right now in the NFL, right?
Yeah.
So Jon Gruden and his infamous emails that were uncovered,
Hmm.
during the investigation of the Washington football team that I like to refer to as that team in DC. Um, I'm gonna say this flat out. Forget bias. Dan Snyder, a despicable human being, and I don't know him personally, but as far as everything he's done, despicable human being.
Yeah.
What I'm looking at is this entire scenario, whether anyone wants to say it or not. Yeah, Dave Chappelle might have been saying something that some people consider redundancy because they already knew. The rest of the world clearly didn't. Because look at the
And we should
shock and
even
awe.
recap that scenario because people
Okay.
may not know.
All right.
You know,
So,
not everybody, yeah.
the Washington football team has been under investigation over the past year and a half because of some let's just say, indecent issues running rampant throughout their organization, and that came from the top down. We're not talking about someone complaining that their complaints weren't heard by brass. Most of these complaints were levied toward brass, starting from Dan Snyder on down.
Mm.
When
Mhm.
you have multiple witnesses, when you have multiple people stepping forward with lawsuits, accusations of alleged harassment, abuse, unfair
Mhm.
practices, being leveraged. Listen,
And not
cheerleaders,
just
cheerleaders
right.
being
Mhm.
forced to participate in a manner that no one would ever agree to. Passports being taken on exclusive photo shoot sessions that turned out to be nothing more than you're running women to appease your boosters?
Mhm.
No. I don't.
And that is just, for that to be known and to have lawsuits and complaints about that, and to because I really didn't hear about it till we were talking about it, recently.
It's something that's
Because
been talked
honestly,
about, but hadn't
yeah.
been brought to the table in this way until Jon Gruden's
Mhm.
emails were uncovered,
Hmm.
along with, I
So
think,
everything that was swept under the
600,000
rug
other
is coming up.
emails. And the
Yeah.
thing about it that made it so damning is that the emails didn't just come from 2008, 2009, 2011, 12. We're talking about at least 7 to 8 years since Jon Gruden even got back into the NFL as a head coach of the Raiders. We're talking about this
Man.
man continuing as recent as 2018 to use certain language that he knew was bigoted and racist, but
Mhm.
continued doing so, right? And then we
Yeah.
watched the NFL sidestep everything they were having problems with Daniel Snyder and the Washington football team. And to the best of my understanding, it looks like they
Mm.
used Jon Gruden as a patsy. They found something that they could all agree with to say, hey,
Mhm.
this person is going to fall on this
He's
score for the
wrong.
shield.
Yeah.
And this is
Something that
what,
has been festering within the whole organization,
not just
because
that
those emails
organization,
were not just right,
not
right.
just that
Yeah, not
organization.
just
I'm
the
going to say this
NFL.
right now. If
Mhm.
Jon Gruden felt comfortable enough to have a
Mhm.
conversation with the general manager of the Washington football team. I understand that Jon Gruden at the time
On
was
their
working for,
work emails.
yes, he was working for
Work
ESPN.
emails.
General manager works for the Washington
Mhm.
football team, and you had no problem sending information back and forth. Not only disparaging information, but sharing, if we're going to be clear here, what they had the
Pictures.
very definition of trading cards. It's just it was about the cheerleaders, right?
Mhm.
And that to me is not only egregious, it's despicable. Um,
Yeah. It's
Especially
disgusting.
in a
It's
professional setting. Like that right there opened up a can of worms that the NFL refuses to look into. And that's where we are right now. When we look at this situation, initially it
and
was
it
he made a comment about DeMaurice Smith, suggesting that his lips, in a derogatory manner, were the size of Michelin tires. Okay.
mm,
When
mhm.
that statement was brought about and released to the public, I watched something very interesting happen. Now I have to go back.
Mm.
Unfortunately, what I saw was Jon Gruden stand in front of a press conference before the next game to be played by the Raiders, where he gave, I don't even want to say it was an apology. He
Mhm.
gave a reason for his comments that we all
Mm.
know was bullshit, right? Oh, I
Mm.
say that about people that I don't think are being genuine. No, you don't, because you never said it about another person who wasn't black. No one has that record, but you certainly had no problem saying it more than once about DeMaurice Smith. Okay. That wasn't enough
So,
to move the needle.
uh-huh.
He did not get fired when the word came out about the initial comments. Nobody had this huge uprising. No one said a word about him getting
Hmm.
fired. They just said the NFL allowed the Washington football team to deal with their matters, and then they sent the emails. When they found out about it, they sent it to the Raiders organization and allowed them to deal with it. Well, initially the Raiders organization had no problem because that man went right out and coached another football game, right?
Mm-hmm.
But before he coached that game, he had the nerve to stand in front of a group of press and media and say, "Hey, I checked and I don't have a racist bone in my body." Great. Glad to
I
know that.
checked and I don't have a racist
Okay.
bone in my body.
And then he had the nerve to be arrogant and dismissive and say, "Well, look, I'm not going to get into this, and this will be the last time I want to talk about this, but we got a game to play. I'm not a racist. Let's move on," is what he said, basically. And then I saw something that I hate seeing,
Mm.
and I'm going to call it out as it is. I watched Tony Dungy and Mike Tirico run a playbook. They set up the press conference review that they typically do on matters like this. They
Yeah,
watched it, and then they turned to their audience and said, Tony Dungy, infamously, "We heard what he
yeah.
said. I accept his apology, and we should all move on
Tony
from
said
this."
that?
Yes,
What?
yes.
Tony said
Anyone
that.
watching can go back and look at the review
Oh,
of that particular game where you have two black men standing in front of millions watching and
and
tuned in,
accepting this man's
and you
apology.
immediately, now without question, hey, and I
I
don't,
gotta go back and look that up.
maybe it's because of their prior relationships with him because they did work in the
Mm-hmm.
same industry. Maybe it's because they've
Yeah.
known each other intimately. Who knows? I don't know.
Maybe
All
because
I
they
know
have
is
emails of their own.
now, I'm not going to speculate, but looking at how everything played out directly after that, because as soon as the tone and narrative of the emails included, slurs directed towards the LGBTQ plus
Mm.
community, that's when the needle jumped. That's when,
So wait,
oh,
not when
wait
it
a
was
minute.
derogatory terms against the black players,
Exactly.
not when it was taking passports away from cheerleaders who you're
Mm-hmm.
forcing to do certain things at certain events,
Mm-hmm.
but when there was derogatory terms towards the LGBTQ plus community, that's when
That's when the
the shit
needle
hit the
moved.
fan, and
That's when
that's
people
when
started.
he had to resign. Um, and this brings up something like kind of I remember when one of our last lives we mentioned Andrew Cuomo, and we said and we had some people. I think it was in Clubhouse actually. So we had some
Mm-hmm.
people who were not from New York, and they're like, "Oh well, we didn't know that he was that these things had popped up about him," and we were like, "Well, that's kind of the responsibility. Like everyone was taking his word, and everyone was loving him during. I was loving him during the
During the pandemic,
updates about the pandemic." And we're saying, but you know what? It's your responsibility to check the information and to check the background of these people that we think are doing a very good job and being upfront in their presentation to the media. And so, with this stuff coming out about the NFL and about Joe Gruden and about all of this other stuff coming out with the emails, is this something that you got to be watching Monday Night Football, Thursday Night Football. You got to be into, ESPN interviews. You got to be on because I'm not,
not
so
at all.
the average person who may watch Sunday Night Football or watch football on Sunday, do they know all of this stuff is happening? Do they know all of this is going on?
This is my
Or
this is my issue with the media and the
mm,
peers of Jon Gruden, such as Dungy, Tarico. Um, they aren't the only ones, right? I
mm,
saw a few people, but those were the most notable in that fashion. Um, it's
wow.
not to say, I'm going to say this. I believe that this is where that divergence of consider the source, right? We know that you're
Mm-hmm,
supposed to vet the scenario as you just mentioned, but when the people you normally turn to, right, the media is what you're talking
mm-hmm,
about. Hey, where can I
mm-hmm,
find more about this story? Well, if they choose to do exactly what Tony Dungy and Mike Tirico said, and they're not the first, when Rachel Nichols infamously cost herself a job and possibly a career in
mm-hmm.
communications and journalism by doing similar things in private, but having that outed in public, you saw, and I'll be completely honest, You saw her co-host on the jump. She gave a half-hearted, I'm sorry if offended you type apology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then I watched Richard Jefferson and another colleague step up and say, well, I believe her and I understand her and I know her to be the. It's not about whether or not you believe her. And I have no smoke for anyone else standing up for their friends, but that's not the
Yeah.
place for that. You
Not
know,
in front of thousands of people.
not when they're looking to you
Mm.
for transparency and the real information, especially when you know. And I'm not going to tell you that I know exactly
Hmm.
what went on during those segments. I have no idea who produced those segments or if they were truly genuine thoughts from each person. What I do know is it looked like a lot of people trying to sweep things under the rug. Hey, here's a black person stepping up and telling you if I'm cool with her or him saying what she said and then apologizing, we should all be a bit forgiving. Should we? When the same thing keeps happening and it's always been that way, I'm not ready to do that. I'm not stepping up and being the shield for anyone else, and I don't think anyone needs to do so for me. If I speak on something out of turn, out of character, then I'm willing to own up to it and deal with the
Mm-hmm.
consequences. That
Yeah.
is a problem. And like you said, if you want to find the information, now you got to find reputable sources within the media because the media is kind of
And I
being
thought
biased.
Tony was. And I would think, to me, someone who used to watch football religiously, now I really don't watch it that much. I'm still a Patriots fan, because I'm always going to be a fan because that's, who I am, even though Brady's, a Tampa. But
Hey,
still a fan and
when
still
you
a
say
fan of
that though,
him, but
say a world
he's the GOAT.
champion with with Tampa Bay. World champion. World
I
champion with
mean,
Tampa Bay.
he may have been with them, but he is the GOAT, he is the GOAT, but you know, eh, it just kind of hits a certain way, like I would consider Tony to be a reputable source.
I thought so
And for
too.
him, right,
But
yeah.
I have to
And
tell you
and that
something
just
about
goes to
Dungy.
say also that how far from the top this comes down, because basically, and again, we can't speak or speculate too much, but I'm quite sure NFL was like, yeah, we need you to respond to this and we need you to say it's okay. Like, I don't
I
know
don't know
if
if
in
that's the
his heart
NFL.
of hearts,
I don't know if that's the
really?
NFL. I'm gonna be honest with you. I've watched Tony Dungy say some very, very strong and stubborn
Mm,
statements about his passion and his commitment to his religion in regards to the LGTB Q plus
mm,
community.
mm-hmm,
And that, like, if you're coming behind a man who was egregious in a manner towards that community, using, we don't need to say the slurs, but you know what
mm-hmm.
they were. I refuse. I
I
don't
gotta look
like
him
using
up.
them. I don't like. I mean, queer is
Yeah.
the easiest you can come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And while that
Yeah.
might be used in the community today, you and I know that that was such a derogatory term for
Mm-hmm.
the greater portion of my life, as far as I understood it. People, when
Yeah.
you use that term, it was a slur, it was offensive. So
Mm-hmm.
to know that you just heard someone admit that they did say these things and you had no problem moving past that and just saying, well, that's enough for me. Let's move. I think the rest of the country should move on. No, that does not sound like sage advice from a respected elder. That sounds like someone
Mm-hmm.
who's being completely dismissive because they somewhat agree.
Mm. That's hard.
And I'm not charging him
That
with a
that
crime.
that
I
there
don't
that
know that that's his true
yeah.
perspective. I'm just saying what it sounds like, what it appears to be. And I could be wrong. I'd love for Tony Dungy to speak on it, but will he? He doesn't have a reason
Maybe
to.
not, especially since and I get where your religious stance and your professional job and career can clash or come into, but part of also what he's doing is um, opinions. He's commentating, so opinions are to be expected.
Hmm.
Um, and just popped into my head like cancel culture, like
Yes.
how much of it also is fear of retaliation or not, maybe not even fear, but hey, I don't want the drama. I don't
Hmm.
want any flashback or nothing of what I say. So I'm just going to be like, okay, I accept it. Thank you. Like not really giving your opinion, but just saying, all right, I accept his opinion, his apology. So,
It's just a strange place to
hmm,
be in. And again,
yeah,
I'm not condemning Tony Dungy for his opinion. I'm actually just disappointed in your manner, in the way that you handle
mm,
it to suggest that other people should move on and that we should all be
wow.
fine with this is a bit more.
Hmm.
It's not so much that he did something wrong. You're now suggesting, in your opinion, that everyone should be okay with it, but you know the leverage you hold. Like you know that Tony Dungy is a respected figure in our community and almost every other.
Right.
Not
Hmm.
just, it goes beyond football. And knowing that,
Exactly. Beyond football, the Black community, as a parent, as a speaker and anything. Yeah.
it's vital to recognize the leverage you hold. And
Hmm.
so, in that same way that we're talking about Dave Chappelle, and we're saying, hey, uh, that's not
Hmm.
cool.
Hmm.
Dave Chappelle, you're being a little insensitive, or you should be a little bit more responsible with the things, the leverage you have, the platform you have. I looked at Tony Dungy and Mike Tirico, and I said, you're standing in front of millions of people telling them that they should be okay with this. And some of them are going to believe that you have a greater understanding of this, and maybe they should listen to you.
Hmm.
But
You're like, oh, okay.
even they didn't know the full. None of us know. As it stands right now, the NFL, number one, never requested and refused to have a written transcript of this investigation that was supposedly done independently. I've never heard of anything like this before, so forgive me for being ignorant that
Yeah.
an investigation can be done without a transcript. How do you come up with the fact finding,
Hmm.
right?
How do you be like, as
How do
shown and proven in said document and, you
exactly?
know,
How
at
do you
this moment
recognize
and at this
content?
point?
How do you
Yeah.
recognize context? If you don't
Mm,
see it
hmm.
in its full form, you just have a few things here and hearsay, or this
Yeah.
is what was reported. So now that the
Yeah.
NFL is refusing, this is the
Mm.
part I have to say. Goodell, the NFL commissioner, as recent as
Our best
Friday,
friend.
says that the NFL and its due diligence to protect those that came forward and risked their livelihoods in order to participate and be transparent, the NFL refuses to share anything else from that report. How can you say that when the very same people you claim to be protecting showed up at your league meetings this past week with
Yeah.
petitions stating that they were under the impression that while their anonymity would be protected to a point,
Right.
that the NFL would take the full measure to make sure that what they were sacrificing their livelihood for, the possibility of losing jobs and careers,
Hmm.
they were doing so because they needed to see more done, that they want a full
Yeah.
report, and they've been requesting that. So to have Goodell say that he's protecting them by not releasing more sounds like a complete sham.
Yeah. Sounds a little suspect.
So I don't think
Which
this
from
is
him,
going
I'm
well.
not surprised.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to tell you that the man hasn't been fair on some things, but we know how the NFL handled Deflategate. We know how it's handled other things. And I just,
There's nothing with this. Nothing.
you're not going to convince people that you checked. I mean, he sounds like he's saying, "Well, I checked and we didn't find anything
Hmm.
racist, so you're just gonna trust us and we're gonna go ahead and move on." No, 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 sir.
So
We don't
then what
trust
was the
you.
whole thing about the emails being leaked? Like,
They should be released. Everything about the
r
report should be released. If you have nothing to hide, release them. But
mm-hmm,
I suspect, like most people, that there's something else within those emails that they could never recover from. And instead of
mm-hmm.
having to deal with
The
that and stepping forward from,
whole
yes,
organization and
notice,
beyond. Like you said, not just the NFL and beyond.
like you're going to then get
Mm,
into corporate politics.
mm,
I mean,
mm,
Colin Kaepernick, the NFL
mm-hmm,
punishing players for kneeling, changing policies
mm-hmm.
for kneeling. You don't do all of that without some,
Concussions, all that.
oh, we're going to be real here. All of that came up in these emails. and none of them were
Oh,
favorable for the league
yeah.
executives. None of them were
Mm-hmm.
favorable for the Washington football team executives, and certainly not for Jon
Mm-hmm.
Gruden. Now, all these people will tell you, but that doesn't mean I'm a racist or a bigot or a, you know
A
what?
racist will never say that they're a racist or a
Thank you.
bigot. Come
Thank you.
on.
Thank you. And I don't need you to. I don't need you to
Right,
recognize who you truly are. But
right.
I'll say
And
this.
this is something that you see the difference between the South and the North. It's like in the North, everyone's smiling in your face, but in the South, you know who don't like you.
Hmm.
They're going to tell you to your face, and there's
Exactly.
nothing hidden about that.
Well,
Nothing.
we're dealing with what
Uh-uh.
we call the good old boy network, right? And that network
Mm-hmm.
ain't changing.
Organized sports.
They have a monopoly in NFL that you don't see in other places. See, a few years ago,
Mm.
Donald Sterling infamously was forced to sell the Clippers for doing the exact same thing in a private conversation. Except in that
Behind closed
scenario,
doors.
the players themselves stepped up and said, "We will not play for this man." So we
Mm-hmm.
understand he owns the team, but it's time for him to go. So you guys have the power to do something about it. We're going to step back, but we won't do another thing until you make the right decision. I will
Yeah.
say this.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's easy to expect more out of people when you don't have anything other than maybe being a fan invested into the scenario. So, as someone who's had friends and family members be a part of the NFL, I understand that their union isn't as strong, their collective bargaining agreement, their guarantees aren't there. So,
Right.
for players to strike in the NFL, for players to stand up, to use that leverage in the NFL is a very dangerous thing. It's dangerous all around, but in their scenarios, chances
Mm-hmm.
are the sheer number, the volume that it takes to make up a football team, everyone knows it's the next man up. So if you don't show up, your job's going to someone else. Basketball isn't
Right.
exactly the same way. While it is a next man up mentality, basketball is made up of a lot more viable faces.
Hmm.
Really, really
Hmm.
in your face.
Mm-hmm.
Football's played with helmets and pads. You don't see
Right.
everyone. You see the people they want you to see. You see the highlighted
Mm-hmm.
individuals. With basketball, you can tune in on any time and see a name on a jersey and a face, clear as day.
Yeah.
You
And the
know.
expressions on those faces too.
Exactly.
You know, and if this is such an issue for these major league sports, can you imagine? Because I just had to bring it back to improper Mimi,
Of
where we
course.
talk about empowering women at home, work, and play. So there's a lot of things that we talk about. Mimi Jackson, we talk about this and we talk about that, but sports is a big thing. And can you just imagine how it is for women or young adults
Hmm.
even, to battle these things in the office, in the workplace. Like here we have these superstars that we look up to, and they're struggling with bringing their truth to the table because, like you say, you're going to be replaced in a minute. You don't like our game, you don't want to play our game, you can get out.
Hmm.
So it takes very, and we've seen a few times throughout the pandemic where the players have come up and stepped up and said, you know what, we're not going to do this, like with Black Lives Matter, like we don't want to, taking time to acknowledge, the wrongdoings that have been happening. But yeah, I mean, and we don't even have to imagine, we see it in front of our faces, the challenges that they have, the challenges we have. The New York City mandate just passed not too
Mm.
recently, like this weekend, evenly, about if you're not vaccinated, then city workers,
Hmm.
you're going to have to what, give up your job or, you can't come in.
Terminated.
And yeah, and
Willful
I'm
termination is
all
the term
for
I
the
read.
health of everybody, but like there's a balance. Like vaccination and or testing. Like if you are tested negative and you come into work, this is my opinion, but why should I lose my job because I don't want to inject something that, and then you get into the kids and the schools and then
Hmm. All of this
you
based
know,
on a possibility. And we all know that it's a very real possibility. It's a very scary possibility.
mm,
But
mm-hmm,
I agree with you. I understand
mm,
either side of this issue. I don't think it's really two sides. I think it's one issue, and I understand the different perspectives. But I definitely recognize that nowhere in this should anyone be mandated. I believe that we're going to have to do something that most people aren't comfortable with, which is accepting the choices that individuals are going to make and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that we're all going to have to move a little differently because of it. It may mean inconveniences. It certainly will mean compromises. But that doesn't give me the right to say, well, I don't trust you. So I'm going to need you to bow to my will. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a situation, unfortunately, we're all kind of
Wow.
winging it.
Mm-hmm.
And no one wants to admit that. You can talk
That's
about
the
all the
thing.
science that you want.
Yeah.
We're following the
Mm-hmm.
known science as we have it today, but we don't know if that's the end all be all. We've seen that situation evolve in a very horrible manner before. And let's be honest, can you be upset with
Mm.
people who were lied to before? They don't know who to trust. No
Oh.
one understands that part better than us.
Mm-hmm.
So if you
Mm-hmm.
have a set of people, a group of a community that feels disenfranchised, that feels put upon and oppressed, and doesn't feel like they ever get their fair shot at anything, of course that community is going to be a little hesitant. I'm not saying that that's all this is, but I've heard a number of people who were concerned, and they have legitimate concerns. And that doesn't mean that that's what's happening here, but we can't dismiss that
Right.
concern. Would you actually say that to a person who was responding to something in fear, anxiety, depression? No, you'd say, while I recognize that your issue with this is a very real and earned fear,
Mm.
you try to reason with them and talk to them. And even if you couldn't get them to, you'd have to put them or place them in a scenario that they could succeed anyway. You have to say, look, this person
Mm. By any means.
might have anxiety, but they've chosen that they don't want to take the meds,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And then
Infamously,
give them an out, give them a something that they can do. Like, because you can definitely still show your commitment to safety and
yes.
respecting other people's health and boundaries, but give them that opportunity, give them that out, you
And
know?
that part's about
Um,
patience because we ran out of
yeah,
patience, I think,
patience
in
and
January.
education, you know?
We ran out
Yeah.
of patience with
Mm-hmm.
this pandemic long before, but I believe in January, every single major political pundit, every business,
Mm.
everyone was looking at the bottom line. How much longer are we gonna have to wait? Because I got plans. Because you're holding up my bread. Because things have changed. And mind you, the whole world is dealing with it, but impatience
Yeah.
led to haste. And we
Mm-hmm.
see that every day now. Does that mean we haven't made some right moves too? I think we have made some good decisions. We
Mm-hmm.
probably made some
Yeah.
questionable decisions, some bad decisions too. But I
It's
just think
lessons
that
learned.
we work together, we're much better for that. The minute we
Yeah.
start functioning on our own in this discord, we just create another America, and this country hasn't been together on anything since its inception.
Listen, this even reminds me of I was recently traveling, right? Because Mimi can't stay still.
Hmm.
But I went to Portugal, and the country, let me tell you, it was like, of course, you gotta have your test to come in. You gotta go, your test. I went to one of their islands, Madeira, which is kind of like, to me, it was kind of like their Puerto Rico. It's like it's part of the country, but it's like their own special little vibe over there.
Okay.
So you had to test to go there, but they, you compared to the US, they have it pretty down as far as, okay, we know that like people are tested, either they're vaccinated or they're not, but they're tested and they have like a low COVID rate and everything.
Hmm.
I mean, man, they had me ready to go live over there and like work remotely.
Was it that
So
nice?
it's like it was really that nice. It was, um, oh man, I think I just need to do a little more research, but I mean, I could definitely see myself living in another country outside of the US, working, living, being vibrant. Um, the language barrier wasn't, that difficult. Everybody speaks English. You might have had to go to certain part of towns to see people, of color or see people similar to you. But I mean, yeah, it's pretty blended, and
yeah, for the most part, people were wearing their mask. I swear I took two tests while I was there, and I was only there for a week. But in order to come back into the US, I needed that one within 72 hours. And then, like I said, I went to another part of the country and I needed one to enter there. So, but yeah, I mean, as far as like um, people being on board and participating and them having, ways to make sure that people are safe. It wasn't this mandate that we're facing here. At least that I didn't see as a tourist. So um, that was cool. That was interesting. Mhm. And part of it too, I think, is because it's not as congested. New York is highly populated, so we had a lot of restrictions. We had everything shut down, right? So um, when I was there in October and of 2021, but it was, um, I mean, people were in the offices. I even went to my corporate office while I was there. So I did the worky work thing. I was like, oh, I'll take a few calls from the hotel room, but I was like, I'm like seeing, our logo around town in Lisbon, and I was like, you know what? I'm going into the corporate office. So I went into the office. There were people there. Um, you know, People were in restaurants. And it wasn't like New York where, but you know what? The whole Europe is a little different because they have their digital, healthcare card. So but it wasn't like you had to show your vaccination or your healthcare card to get into places, like restaurants and stuff like that. Um, so things were pretty open. People were still, um, you know, taking tours of castles, walking around, eating outside. It was unusually warm when I was there, so people were a lot of outdoor activities. Um, I would definitely go back. Um, yeah, we had us a good old time. We had I think it was 5 Black women traveling abroad. Um, a little bumps here and there, just with, are you sure you're supposed to be here? And we're like, yeah, we're very sure we're supposed to be here. Yeah, yeah. That was more so France, maybe not Portugal, but it was still, a little, bumpy about, "Ooh, this is a special area." We're like, "Yes, and I'm very special, and I have no problem with that. Thank you very much." Yeah. And I watched a few, when you travel, I kind of do a little prep work too, so I watched a few videos of expats in Portugal or blacks in Lisbon, like I'm always looking up wherever I travel, I always look up blacks in that place, like I want to know even the whole diaspora, like places that I love to travel, wherever our people were taken from Africa and they've were taken to, I want to go see how they're living now. I want to go to some of those countries and just see their history, their experience, their journey. And and even just to you know, I want to see what how are the locals actually being treated? I don't want to go to all the touristy spots. I want to go to that little hole in the wall, down that alley, and then hold up, wait a minute, I'm by myself at 11 o'clock at night. Maybe I shouldn't go down this alley. But there was like no crime there either. So it was like I felt very comfortable, traversing across the city, because, also, Mimi is very much, even though I was traveling with a group of women, I very much was like, "Oh, you guys are leaving Monday? I'm gonna stay till Wednesday, and I'm gonna, yeah, just have a little bit of solo Mimi time." And I kind of talked about that a little bit um, on the last podcast too. But I'm like, a little bit of solo Mimi time is always good, just to relax, get to know the city, like you say, the experience of that day-to-day experience, and not just, as a tourist. So, yeah. All righty. Well, hey, we had us a good time tonight. Thank you. Have a very safe and happy Halloween too.
If you have a topic or something you have been musing on, let me know at mpropermimi.com. That's mpropermimi with an M.com. Or you can always slip me a message on social media using my handle, MProperMimi. It may end up being our next topic of discussion. But in the meantime, thank you all for listening to MProper Musings, where we were able to sit down and catch up with Cy behind the scenes as we discuss topics for the show and cover topics currently in the news. Remember, stay as fabulous as you are as we relish being in this glorious Scorpio season. I'm going to continue to bring you new episodes every other MProper Mimi Monday, so stay tuned. Protect yourself, continue to look out for each other, and as always, keep telling Black stories. Ciao.